and the others were not much more difficult to figure out. I managed to much better inside Lady Alice's hood than Orbon did, and her face makes that stone-faced fellow a warder. The light burned me if I'd want that one angry with me. Does he always look like that, or did he eat a rock for his last meal? Anyway, that left only you. I do not like things I cannot account for. Once again, he considered tossing her over the side. Seriously this time. But Remen was now only a blotch of light well behind them in the darkness, and no telling how far it was to shore. She seemed to take his silence as an urging to go on. So there I have an... She looked around, then dropped her voice, though the closest crewman was working a sweep 10 feet away. And I said I, a warder, oh dear, and you. A countryman by first look at you. Her tilted eyes rose to study his yellow ones intently. He refused to look away, and she smiled.
Academy to deliver a message to Vienna, Brisa explained. He shan't return for many hours, not before the light of Nargandel begins its descent. That is good, said Malice. You both understand your duties in this force. Brisa and Maya nodded. I have never heard of such a deception, Maya remarked. Is it necessary? It was planned for another of the house, Brisa answered, looking to Matron Malice for confirmation. Nearly 4 centuries ago. Yes, agreed Malice. The same was to be done to Zaknafane, but the unexpected death of Matron Vartha, my mother, disrupted the plans. That was when you became the Matron Mother, Maya said. Yes, replied Malice. I passed my first century of life, and was still training in Erech Tinolith. It was not a pleasant time in the history of House Do'Urden. But we survived, said Brisa. With the death of Matron Vartha, now Fane and I became nobles of the house. The test on Zaknafane was never attempted, Maya reasoned. Too many other duties preceded it, Malice answered. We will try it on Driz, though, said Maya. A punishment of House Tikanduis convinced me that this action had to be taken, said Malice. Yes, Brisa agreed. Did you notice Driz's expression throughout the execution? I did, answered Maya. He was revolted. Unfitting for a drow warrior, said Malice. And so this duty is upon us. Driz will leave for the academy in a short time. We must stain his hands with drow blood and steal his innocence. It seems a lot of trouble for a male child, Brisa grumbled. If Driz cannot adhere to our ways, then why do we not simply give him to Lolth? I will bear no more children, Malice growled in response. Every member of this family is important if we are to gain prominence in the city. Secretly, Malice hoped for another gain in converting Driz to the evil ways of the drow. She hated Zaknafane as much as she desired him, and turning Driz into a drow warrior, a true, heartless drow warrior, would distress the weapons master greatly. On with it then, Malice proclaimed. She clapped her hands, and a large chest.
Hey, Chris, how you doing? Hope you're doing well.
Legs. Behind it came a nervous goblin slave. Come, Beaut.
Salut Chris, j'espère que tu vas bien.
Malice said in a comforting tone. Anxious to please, the slave bounded up before Malice's throne and held perfectly still as the matron mother went through the incantation of a long and complicated spell. Brisa and Maya watched in admiration at their mother's skills. The little goblin's features bulged and twisted, and its skin darkened. A few minutes later, the slave had assumed the appearance of a male drow. Beaut looked at its features happily, not understanding that the transformation was merely a prelude to death. You are a drow soldier now, Maya said to it, and my champion. You must kill only a single inferior fighter to take your place as a free commoner of House Doer. After 10 years as an
Hell yeah,
servant
Chris.
to the wicked Dark Elves, the goblin was more than eager. Malice rose and started out of the anteroom. Come, she ordered, and her 2 daughters, the goblin and the animated chest, fell in line behind her. They came upon Drizzt in the practice room, polishing the razor edge of his scimitars. He leaped straight up to silent attention at the sight of the unexpected visitors. "Greetings, my son," Malice said, in a tone more motherly than Drizzt had ever heard. "We have a test for you this day. A simple task necessary for your acceptance into Melee Magvir.
Oh, is it raining?
I am the youngest beside yourself," she declared. "Thus I am granted the rights of challenge, which I now execute." Drizzt stood confused. He had never heard of such a thing. Maya called the chest to her side and reverently opened the cover. "You have your weapons and your Puafui," she explained. "Now it is time for you to don the complete outfit of a noble of House Doe." From the chest, she pulled out a pair of high black boots and handed them to Drizzt. Drizzt eagerly slipped out of his normal boots and put on the new ones. They were incredibly soft, and they magically shifted and adjusted to a perfect fit on his feet. Drizzt knew the magic within them. They would allow him to move in absolute silence. Before he had even finished admiring them, though, Maya gave him the next gift, even more magnificent. Drizzt dropped his Puafui to the floor as he took a set of silvery chainmail. In all the realms, there was no armor as supple and finely crafted as drow chainmail. It weighed no more than a heavy shirt, and would bend as easily as silken cloth, yet could deflect the tip of a spear as surely as dwarven-crafted plate mail. "You fight with 2 weapons," Maya said, "and therefore need no shield. But put your scimitars in this. It is more fitting to a drow noble." She handed Drizzt a black leather belt, its clasp a huge emerald, and its 2 scabbards richly decorated in jewels and gemstones. "Prepare yourself," Malice said to Drizzt. "The gifts must be earned." As Drizzt started to don the outfit, Malice moved beside the altered goblin, which stood nervously in the growing realization that its fight would be no simple task. "When you kill him, the items will be yours," Malice promised. The goblin's smile returned tenfold. It could not comprehend
I'll be
that it
right
had
back.
a chance against Drizzt. When Drizzt again fastened his Puafui around his neck, Maya introduced the phony drow soldier. "This is Buchuch," she said, "my champion. You must defeat him to earn the gifts, and your proper place in the family." Never doubting his abilities, and thinking the contest to be a simple sparring match, Drizzt readily agreed. "Let it begin then," he said, drawing his scimitars from their lavish sheaths. Malice gave Buchuch a comforting nod, and the goblin took up the sword and shield that Maya had provided and moved right in at Drizzt. Drizzt began slowly, trying to take a measure of his opponent before attempting any daring offensive strikes. In only a moment, though, Drizzt realized how badly Buchuch handled the sword and shield. Not knowing the truth of the creature's identity, Drizzt could hardly believe that a drow would show such ineptitude with weapons. He wondered if Buchuch was baiting him, and with that thought continued his cautious approach. After a few more moments of Buchuch's wild and off-balance swings, however, Drizzt felt compelled to take the initiative. He slapped one scimitar against Buchuch's shield. The goblin drow responded with a lumbering thrust, and
Nice.
slapped its sword.
Yeah, he's asleep in his room right now.
And executed a simple twist that brought the scimitar's tip to a halt against the hollow of Buchuch's chest. "Too easy," Drizzt muttered under his breath. But the true test had only begun. On cue, Breeza cast a mind-numbing spell on the goblin, freezing it in its helpless position. Still aware of its predicament, Buchuch tried to dive away, but Breeze's spell held it still. "Finish the strike," Malice said to Drizzt. Drizzt looked at his scimitar, then to Malice, unable to believe what he was hearing. "Maya's champion must be killed," Breeze said. cannot, Drizzt began. Kill, Malice roared. And this time the word carried the weight of a magical command. Thrust, Frieza likewise commanded. Drizzt felt their words compelling his hand to action. Thoroughly disgusted with the thought of murdering a helpless foe, he concentrated with all of his mental strength to resist. While he managed to deny the commands for a few seconds, Drizzt found that he could not pull the weapon away. Kill! Malice screamed. Strike! Yelled Frieza. It went on for several more agonizing seconds. Sweat beaded on Drizzt's brow. Then the young Drow's willpower broke. His scimitar slipped quickly between Buchooch's ribs and found the unfortunate creature's heart. Frieza released Buchooch from her holding to let Drizzt see the agony on the foaming Drow's face and hear the gurgles as the dying Buchooch slipped to the floor. Drizzt could not find his breath as he stared at his blood-stained weapon. It was Maya's turn to act. She clipped Drizzt on the shoulder with her mace, knocking him to the floor. You killed my champion, she growled. Now you must fight me. Drizzt rolled back to his feet, away from the enraged female. He had no intention of fighting, but before he could even drop his weapons, Malice read his thoughts and warned. If you do not fight, Maya will kill you. This is not the way, Drizzt protested. His words were lost in the ring of adamantine as he passed down one scimitar. He was whether he liked it or not. Maya was a skilled fighter. She spent many hours training with weapons, and she was stronger than Drizzt. But Drizzt was Zack's son, the prime student, and when he admitted to himself that he had no way out of this predicament, he came in at Maya's mace and shield with every cunning maneuver he had been taught. Scimitars weaved and dipped in a dance of all Frieza and Maya. Malice hardly noticed, Drizzt defeated another mighty spell. Malice never doubted that Drizzt could defeat his sister, and she had incorporated her expectations into the plan. Drizzt's moves were all defensive as he continued to hope for semblance of sanity to come over his mind. This whole thing would be stopped. He wanted to back Maya up, cause her to stumble, and end the fighting by putting her in a helpless position. Drizzt had to believe that Frieza and Malice would not compel him to kill Maya as he had killed Buchooch. Finally, Maya did slip. She threw her shield out to deflect an arcing scimitar, but became overbalanced in the block, and her arm went wide. Drizzt's other blade knifed in, only to nick at Maya's breast and force her back. Malice's spell caught the weapon in mid-thrust. The blood-stained adamantine blade rolled, and Drizzt found himself in the tail of a serpent, a fanged viper that turned back against him. The enchanted snake spat its venom in Drizzt's eyes, blinding him. Then he felt the pain of Frieza's whip. All 6 snakeheads of the awful weapon bit into Drizzt's back, tearing through his new armor and jolting him in excruciating pain. He crumpled down into a curled position, helpless as Frieza snapped the whip in again and again. Never strike at a drow female, she screamed as she beat Drizzt into unconsciousness. An hour later, Drizzt opened his eyes. He was in his bed, Matron Malice standing over him. The high priestesses had tended to his wounds, but the sting remained, a vivid reminder of the lesson. But it was not nearly as vivid as the blood that still stained Drizzt's scimitar. The armor will be replaced, Malice said to him. You are a drow warrior now. You have earned it. She turned and walked out of the room, leaving Drizzt to his pain and his fallen innocence. Do not send him, Zack argued as emphatically as he dared. He stared up at Matron Malice, the queen on her high throne of stone and black velvet. As always, Frieza and Maya stood obediently by her sides. He is a drow fighter, Malice replied, her tone still controlled. He must go to the academy. It is our way. Zack looked around helplessly. He hated this place, the chapel anteroom, with its sculptures of the Spider Queen leering down at him from every angle, and with Malice sitting, towering above him from her seat of power. Zack shook the images away and regained his courage, reminding himself that this time he had something worth arguing about. Do not send him, he growled. They will ruin him. Matron Malice's hands clenched down on the rock arms of her great chair. Already Drizzt is more skilled than half of those in the academy, Zack continued quickly, before the matron's anger burst forth. "Allow me 2 more years, and I will make him the finest swordsman in all of Menzoberranzan." Alice eased back on her seat. From what she had seen of her son's progress, she could not deny the possibilities of Zack's claim. "He goes," she said calmly. "There is more to the making of a drow warrior than skill with weapons. Drizzt has other lessons he must learn." "Lessons of treachery?" Zack spat, too angry to care about the consequences. Drizzt had told him what Malice and her evil daughters had done that day, and Zack was wise enough to understand their actions. Their lesson had nearly broken the boy, and had perhaps forever stolen from Drizzt the ideals he held so dear. Drizzt would find his morals and principles harder to cling to, now that the pedestal of purity had been knocked out from under him. "Watch your tongue, Zack Nafane," Matron Malice warned. "I fight with passion," the weapons master snapped. "That is why I win. Your son too fights with passion. Do not let the conforming ways of the Academy take that from him." "Leave us," Malice instructed her daughters. Maya bowed and rushed out through the door. Lisa followed more slowly, pausing to cast a suspicious eye upon Zack. Zack didn't return the glare, but he entertained a fantasy concerning his sword and Breeze's smug smile. "Zack Nafane," Malice began, again coming forward in her chair, "I have tolerated your blasphemous beliefs through these many years because of your skill with weapons. You have taught my soldiers well, and your love of killing drow, particularly clerics of the Spider Queen, has aided the ascent of House Do'Urden. I am not, and have not been, ungrateful. But I warn you one final time that Drizzt is my son, not his sire's. He will go to the Academy and learn what he must to take his place as a prince of House Do'Urden. If you interfere with what must be Zack Nafane, I will no longer turn my eyes from your actions. Your heart will be given to Lolth." Zack stamped his heels on the floor and snapped a short bow of his head, then spun about and departed, trying to find some option in this dark and hopeless picture. As he made his way through the main corridor, he again heard in his mind the screams of the dying children of House DeVere, children who never got the chance to witness the evils of the Drow Academy. Perhaps they were better off dead. 11. Grim Preference. Zack slid one of his swords from its scabbard and admired the weapon's wondrous detail. This sword, as with most of the Drow weapons, had been forged by the Grey Dwarves, then traded to Menzoberranzan. The Duergar workmanship was exquisite, but it was the work done on the weapon after the Dark Elves had acquired it that made it so very special. None of the races of the Surface or Underdark could outdo the Dark Elves in the art of enchanting weapons. Imbued with the strange emanations of the Underdark, the magical power unique to the lightless world, and blessed by the unholy clerics of Lolth, no blade ever sat in a wielder's hand more ready to kill. Other races, mostly dwarves and surface elves, also took pride in their crafted weapons. Fine swords and mighty hammers hung over mantels as showpieces, always with a bard nearby to spout the accompanying legend that most often began, "In the days of yore." Drow weapons were different, never showpieces. They were locked in the necessities of the present, never in reminiscences, and their purpose remained unchanged for as long as they held an edge fine enough for battle, fine enough to kill. Zack brought the blade up before his eyes. In his hands, the sword had become more than an instrument of battle. It was an extension of his rage, his answer to an existence he could not accept. It was his answer, too, perhaps, to another problem that seemed to have no resolution. He walked into the training hall, where Drizzt was hard at work spinning attack routines against a practice dummy. Zack paused to watch the young drow in practice, wondering if Drizzt would ever again consider the dance of weapons a form of play. How the scimitars flowed in Drizzt's hands, interweaving with uncanny precision. Each blade seemed to
Hell yeah,
anticipate the other's
Christopher.
moves and word about
Those
it
ones
perfect
sound good.
complement. This young drow might soon be an unrivaled fighter, a master beyond Zach Nefane himself. Can you survive? Zach whispered. Have you the heart of a drow warrior? Zach hoped that the answer would be an emphatic no. But either way, Drizzt was surely doomed. Zach looked down at his sword again and knew what he must do. He slid its sister blade from its sheath and started a determined walk toward Drizzt. Drizzt saw him coming and turned at the ready. A final fight before I leave for the academy? He laughed. Zach paused to take note of Drizzt's smile. Facade. Or had the young drow really forgiven himself for his actions against Maya's champion? It did not matter, Zach reminded himself. Even if Drizzt had recovered from his mother's torments, the academy would destroy him. The weapons master said nothing. He just came on in a flurry of cuts and stabs that put Drizzt immediately on the defensive. Drizzt took it in stride, not yet realizing that this final encounter with his mentor was much more than their customary sparring. I will remember everything you taught me, Drizzt promised, dodging a cut and launching a fierce counter of his own. I will carve my name in the halls of Melee MacVir and make you proud. The scowl on Zach's face surprised Drizzt, and the young drow grew even more surprised when the weapons master's next attack sent a sword knifing straight at his heart. Drizzt leaped aside, slapping at the blade in sheer desperation, and narrowly avoided impalement. Are you so very sure of yourself? Zach growled, stubbornly pursuing.
Nice. The old ones are always the good ones too, though.
As their blades met in ringing fury. I am a fighter, he declared, a drow warrior. You are a dancer, Zach shot back in a derisive tone. He slammed his sword onto Drizzt's blocking scimitar so savagely that the young drow's arm tingled. An impostor, Zach cried. A pretender to a title you cannot begin to understand. Drizzt went on the offensive. Fire burned in his lavender eyes, and new strength guided his scimitar's sure cuts. But Zach was relentless. He fended the attacks and continued his lesson. You know the emotions of murder? He spat. Have you reconciled yourself to the act you committed? Drizzt's only answers were a frustrated growl and a renewed attack. Ah, the pleasure of plunging your sword into the bosom of a high priestess, Zach taunted. To see the light of warmth leave her body while her lips utter silent curses in your face. Or have you ever heard the screams of dying children? Drizzt let up his attack, but Zach would not allow a break. The weapons master came back on the offensive, each thrust aimed for a vital area. How loud those screams, Zach continued. They echo over the centuries in your mind. They chase you down the paths of your entire life. Zach halted the action so that Drizzt might weigh his every word. You have never heard them, have you, dancer? The weapons master stretched his arms out wide, an invitation. Come then, and claim your second kill, he said, tapping his stomach. In the belly, where the pain is greatest, so that my screams may echo in your mind. Prove to me that you are the drow warrior you claim to be. The tips of Drizzt's scimitars slowly made their way to the stone floor. He wore no smile now. You hesitate, Zach laughed at him. This is your chance to make your name. A single thrust, and you will send a reputation into the academy before you. Other students, even masters, will whisper your name as you pass. Drizzt O'Urden, they will say, the boy who slew the most honored weapons master in all of Menzoberranzan. Is this not what you desire? Damn you, Drizzt spat back, but still he made no move to attack. Drow warrior? Zach chided him. Do not be so quick to claim a title you cannot begin to understand. Drizzt came on then, in a fury he had never before known. His purpose was not to kill, but to defeat his teacher, to steal the taunts from Zach's mouth with a fighting display too impressive.
No, I'm not too bad. I can't complain too much.
Brilliant. He followed every move with three others and worked Zach low and high, inside and out wide. Zach found his heels under him more often than the balls of his feet. Too involved was he in staying away from his students' relentless thrusts to even think of taking the offensive. He allowed Drizzt to continue the initiative for many minutes, dreading its conclusion, the outcome he had already decided to be the most preferable. Zach then found that he could stand the delay no longer. He sent one sword out in a lazy thrust, and Drizzt promptly slapped the weapon out of his hand. Even as the young drow came on in anticipation of victory, Zack slipped his empty hand into a pouch and grabbed a magical little ceramic weapon, one of those that soldiers had aided him in battle. "Not this time, Zack Nathane," Drizzt proclaimed, keeping his attacks under control, remembering well the many occasions that Zack reversed feigned disadvantage into clear advantage. Zack fingered the ball, unable to come to terms with what he must do. Drizzt walked him through an attack sequence, then another, measuring the advantage he had gained in stealing a weapon. Confident of his position, Drizzt came in low and hard with a single thrust. Though Zack was distracted at the time, he still managed to block the attack with his remaining sword. Drizzt's other sword slashed down on the top of the sword, and its tip to the floor. In the same movement, Drizzt slipped his first blade free of Zack's parry and brought it up and around, stopping the thrust barely an inch from Zack's throat. "I have you," the young man. Zack's answer came in an explosion of light beyond anything Drizzt had ever imagined. Zack had prudently closed his eyes, but Drizzt, surprised, could not accept the sudden change. His head burned in agony, and he reeled backward, trying to get away from the light, away from the weapons master. With his eyes tightly shut, Zack had already divorced himself from the need of vision. But his keen ears guided him, and Drizzt, shuffling and stumbling, was an easy target to discern. In a single motion, the whip came off Zack's belt, and he lashed out, catching Drizzt around the ankles and dropping him to the floor. Methodically, the weapons master came on, dreading every step, but knowing his chosen course of action to be correct. Drizzt realized that he was being stalked, but could not understand the motive. The light had stunned him, but he was more surprised by Zack's continuation of the battle. Drizzt set himself, unable to escape the trap, and tried to think his way around his loss of sight. He had to feel the flow of battle, to hear the sound of his attacker and anticipate each move. He brought his scimitars up just in time to block a sword chop that would have split his skull. Zack hadn't expected the parry. He recoiled and came in from a different angle. Again he was foiled. Now more curious than wanting to kill Drizzt, the weapons master went through a series of attacks,
cheers, Chris.
sending his sword into motions that would have sliced through the
Now to
defenses
smoke
of
a
many who could
little,
see him.
a little bit of
Drizzt fought
bubble
him off,
hash.
putting a scimitar in line with each new thrust. "Treachery!" Drizzt yelled, painful residual explosions from the bright light still bursting inside his head. He blocked another attack and tried to regain his footing, realizing that he had little chance of continuing to fend off the weapons master from a prone position. The pain of the stinging light was too great, though, and Drizzt, barely holding the edge of consciousness, fell back to the stone, losing one scimitar in the process. He spun over wildly, knowing that Zack was closing in. The other scimitar was knocked from his hand. "Treachery!" Drizzt growled again. "You so hate to lose? Do you not understand?" Zack yelled back at him. "To lose is to die. You may win 1,000 fights, but you can only lose one." He put his sword in line with Drizzt's throat. It would be a single clean blow. He knew that he should do it, mercifully, before the masters of the academy got hold of his charge. Zack sent his sword spinning across the room, and he reached out with his empty hands, grabbed Drizzt by the front of his shirt, and hoisted him to his feet. They stood face to face, neither seeing the other very well in the blinding glare, and neither able to break the tense silence. After a long and breathless moment, the glamour of the enchanted pebble faded, and the room became more comfortable. Truly, the two dark elves looked upon each other in a different light. "A trick of lost clerics," Zack explained. "Always they keep such a spell of light at the ready." A strange smile crossed his face as he tried to ease Drizzt's anger. "Oh, I dare say that I have turned such light against clerics, even high priestesses, more than a few times." "Treachery!" Drizzt spat a third time. "It is our way," Zack replied. "You will learn." "It is your way," snarled Drizzt. "You grin when you speak of murdering clerics of the Spider Queen. Do you so enjoy killing drow?" Zack answers the accused. Drizzt's words hurt him profoundly because they rang the truth. And and because Zack had come to view his penchant for killing clerics of Loth as a cowardly response to his own unanswerable frustrations. "You would have killed me," Drizzt said bluntly. "I did not," Zack retorted. "And now you live to go to the academy. You take a dagger in the back because you are blind to the realities of our world, because you refuse to acknowledge what your people are, or you will become one of them," Zack growled. "Either way, the Drizzt Do'Urden I have known will surely die." Drizzt's face twisted, and he couldn't even find the words to dispute the possibilities Zack was spitting at him. He felt the blood drain from his face, while his heart raged. He walked away, letting his glare linger on Zack for many steps. "Go then, Drizzt Do'Urden," Zack cried after him. "Go to the academy and bask in the glory of your prowess. Remember, though, the consequences of such skills. Always there are consequences." Zack retreated to the security of his private chamber. The door to the room closed behind the weapon.
Actually, my brother, Most Hated Grower, made it with all of our previous harvests that we had. All our trim and little nugs that didn't really get to dry too much or weren't going to dry out for much.
Dean came for his brother early the next morning. Drizzt slowly left the training.
I think he said we ended up getting
steps to see if Zack would come out and attack him again.
I think we got like 16 grams each, something like that.
Friends, and believed that the bond he and Zack had sown went far beyond the simple lessons in swordplay. The young drow had no answers to the many questions spinning in his mind, and the person who had been his teacher for the last 5 years had nothing left to offer him. "The heat grows in Nargandel," Eden remarked when they stepped out onto the balcony. "You must not be late for your first day in the academy." Drizzt looked out into the myriad colors and shapes that composed Menzo Berenstain. "What is this place?" he whispered, realizing how little he knew of his homeland beyond the walls of his own house. Zack's words, Zack's rage, pressed in on Drizzt as he stood there, reminding him of his ignorance and hinting at a dark path ahead. "This is your world," Eden replied, though Drizzt's question had been rhetorical. "Do not worry, second boy," he laughed, moving up onto the railing. "You will learn of Menzo Berenstain in the academy. You will learn who you are and who your people are." The declaration unsettled Drizzt. Perhaps, remembering his last bitter encounter with the drow he had most trusted, that knowledge was exactly what he was afraid of. He shrugged in resignation and followed Dean over the balcony, in a magical descent to the compound floor. The first steps down that dark path. Another set of eyes watched intently as Dean and Drizzt started out from House Do'Urden. Alton DeVere sat quietly against the side of a gigantic mushroom, as he had every day for the last 10 days, staring at the Do'Urden complex. Dairnon Eneshesbernon, 9th house of Menzo Berenstain, a house that had murdered his matron, his sisters and brothers, and all there ever was of House DeVere, except for Alton. Alton thought back to the days of House DeVere, when matron Jennifer had gathered the family members together so that they might discuss their aspirations. Alton, just a student when House DeVere fell, now had a greater insight to those times. 20 years had brought a wealth of experience. Jennifer had been the youngest matron among the ruling families, and her potential had seemed unlimited. And she had aided a gnomish patrol, had used her Loth-given powers to hinder the drow elves that ambushed the little people in the caverns outside Menzo Berenstain, all because Jennifer desired the death of a single member of that attacking drow party, a wizard son of the city's 3rd house, the house labeled as House DeVere's next victim. The Spider Queen took exception to Jennifer's choice of weapons. Deep gnomes were the Dark Elves' worst enemy in the whole of the Underdark. With Jennifer fallen out of Loth's favor, House DeVere had been doomed. Alton had spent 20 years trying to learn of his enemies, trying to discover which drow family had taken advantage of his mother's mistake and had slaughtered his kin. 20 long years, and his adopted matron, Sinefay Annette, had ended his quest as abruptly as it had begun. Now, as Alton sat watching the guilty house, he knew only one thing for certain. 20 years had done nothing to diminish his rage. Part 3. The Academy. The Academy. It is the propagation of the lies that bind drow society together. The ultimate perpetration of falsehoods repeated so many times that they ring true against any contrary evidence. The lessons young drow are taught of truth and justice are so blatantly refuted by everyday life in wicked Menzo-Baranzan that it is hard to understand how any could believe them. Still they do. Even now, decades removed, the thought of the place frightens me. Not for any physical pain or the ever-present sense of possible death. I have trod down many roads equally dangerous in that way. The Academy of Menzo-Baranzan frightens me when I think of the survivors, the graduates, existing, reveling within the evil fabrications that shape their world. They live with the belief that anything is acceptable if you can get away with it, that self-gratification is the most important aspect of existence, and that power comes only to she or he who is strong enough and cunning enough to snatch it from the failing hands of those who no longer deserve it. Compassion has no place in Menzo-Baranzan, and yet it is compassion, not fear, that brings harmony to most races. It is harmony, working toward shared goals, that precedes greatness. Lies engulf the drow in fear and mistrust, refute friendship at the tip of a Loth-blessed sword. The hatred and ambition fostered by these amoral tenets are the doom of my people, a weakness that they perceive as
Hey, USA, how you doing?
as a paralyzing,
Hell yeah. You have a good night.
call the edge of
Appreciate you stopping by.
I do not know how I survived the Academy, how I discovered the falsehoods early enough to use them in contrast, and thus strengthen those ideals I most cherish. It was Zaknathane, I must believe, my teacher, through the experiences of Zak's long years, which embittered him and cost him so much. I came to hear the screams of protest against murderous treachery, the screams of rage from the leaders of Drow society, the high priestesses of the Spider Queen, echoing down the paths of my mind, ever to hold a place within my mind. The screams of dying children. Drizzt, Goward. 12. This enemy, they. Wearing the outfit of a noble son, and with a dagger concealed in one boot, a suggestion from Dinan, Drizzt ascended the wide stone stairway that led to Tir-Bresh, the Academy of the Drow. Drizzt reached the top and moved between the giant pillars, under the impassive gazes of 2 guards, last year's students of Melee Magvir. 2 dozen other young drow milled about the Academy compound, but Drizzt hardly noticed them. 3 structures dominated his vision.
Oh, it's all good, USA. Definitely, hope it gets better for y'all. That sucks about when your animals pass.
His 10th and last year of study in there. Before him, at the back of the level, loomed the most impressive structure, Eric Tinolith, the School of Loth, carved from the stone into the likeness of a giant spider. By drow reckoning, this was the Academy's most important building, and thus was normally reserved for females. Male students were housed within Eric Tinolith only during their last 6 months of study, while Sorcerer and Eric Tinolith were the more graceful structures. The most important building for Drizzt at that tentative moment lined the wall to his right, the pyramidal structure of Melee Magvir, the School of Fighters. This building would be Drizzt's home for the next 9 years. His companions, he now realized, were those other dark elves in the compound, fighters like himself, about to begin their formal training. The class at 25 was unusually large for the school of fighters. Even more unusual, several of the novice students were nobles. Drizzt wondered how his skills would measure up against theirs, how his sessions with Zaknafein compared to the battles these others had no doubt fought with the weapons masters of their respective families. Those thoughts inevitably led Drizzt back to his last encounter with his mentor. He quickly dismissed the memories of that unpleasant duel, and more pointedly, the disturbing questions Zak's observations had forced him to consider. There was no place for such doubts on this occasion. Melee Macthier loomed before him, the greatest test and the greatest lesson of his young life. "My greetings," came a voice behind him. Drizzt turned to face a fellow novice, who wore a sword and dirk uncomfortably on his belt, and who appeared even more nervous than Drizzt. A comforting sight. "Kelnaz of House Kenefin, 15th House," the novice said. "Drizzt de Werden, of Daermon and Ashesbernon, House de Werden, 9th House of Menzoberranzan," Drizzt replied automatically, exactly as Matron Mallis had instructed him. "A noble," remarked Kelnaz, understanding the significance of Drizzt bearing the same surname as his house. Kelnaz dropped into a low bow. "I am honored by your presence." Drizzt was starting to like this place already. With the treatment he normally received at home, he hardly thought of himself as a noble. Any self-important notions that might have occurred to him at Kelnaz's gracious greeting were dispelled a moment later, though, when the masters came out. Drizzt saw his brother Dinan among them, but pretended, as Dinan had warned him to, not to notice, nor to expect any special treatment. Drizzt rushed inside Melee Macthier along with the rest of the students when the whips began to snap, and the masters started shouting of the dire consequences if they tarried. They were herded down a few side corridors and into an oval room. "Sit or stand as you will," one of the masters growled. Noticing two of the students whispering off to the side, the master took his whip out and crack took one of the offenders off his feet. Drizzt couldn't believe how quickly the room then came to order. "I am Hatchnet," the master began in a resounding voice, "the master of lore. This room will be your hall of instruction for 50 cycles of Narvandel." He looked around at the adorned belts on every figure. "You will bring no weapons to this place." Hatchnet paced the perimeter of the room, making certain that every eye followed his movements attentively. "You are Drow," he snapped suddenly. "Do you understand what that means? Do you know where you come from and the history of our people? Menzoberranzan was not always our home, nor was any other cavern of the Underdark. Once we walked the surface of the world." He spun suddenly and came up right in Drizzt's face. "Do you know of the surface?" Master Hatchnet snarled. Drizzt recoiled and shook his head. "An awful place," Hatchnet continued, turning back to the whole of the group. "Each day, as the glow begins its rise in Narvandel, a great ball of fire rises into the open sky above, bringing hours of a light greater than the punishing spells of the priestesses of Lolth." He held his arms outstretched, with his eyes turned upward, and an unbelievable grimace spread across his face. Students' gasps rose up all about him. "Even in the night, when the ball of fire has gone below the far rim of the world," Hatchnet continued, weaving his words as if he were telling a horror tale, "one cannot escape the uncounted terrors of the surface. Reminders of what the next day will bring, dots of light, and sometimes a lesser ball of silvery fire, mar the sky's blessed darkness. Once our people walked the surface of the world," he repeated, his tone now one of lament. "In ages long past, even longer than the lines of the great houses. In that distant age, we walked beside the pale-skinned elves, the Fairies." "It cannot be true," one student cried from the side. Hatchnet looked at him earnestly, considering whether more would be gained by beating the student for his unasked-for interruption, or by allowing the group to participate. "It is," he replied, choosing the latter course. "We thought the Fairies our friends. We called them kin. We could not know, in our innocence, that they were the embodiments of deceit and evil. We could not know that they would turn on us suddenly and drive us from them, slaughtering our children and the eldest of our race. Without mercy, the evil fairies pursued us across the surface world. Always we asked for peace, and always we were answered by swords and killing arrows. He paused, his face twisting into a widening, malicious smile. Then we found the goddess. Praise Lolth, came one anonymous cry. Again, Hatchnet let the slip of tongue go by unpunished, knowing that every accenting comment only drew his audience deeper into his web of rhetoric. Indeed, the master replied. All praise to the Spider Queen. It was she who took our orphaned race to her side and helped us fight off our enemies. It was she who guided the four matrons of our race to the paradise of the Underdark. It is she, he roared, a clenched fist rising into the air, who now gives us the strength and the magic to pay back our enemies. We are the Drow, Hatchnet cried. You are the Drow, never again to be downtrodden, rulers of all you desire, conquerors of lands you choose to inhabit. The surface? Came a question. The surface, echoed Hatchnet with a laugh. Who would want to return to that vile place? Let the fairies have it. Let them burn under the fires of the open sky. We claim the Underdark, where we can feel the core of the world thrumming under our feet, and where the stones of the walls show the heat of the world's power. Drizzt sat silent, absorbing every word of the talented orator's often rehearsed speech. Drizzt was caught, as were all the new students, in Hatchnet's hypnotic variations of inflection and rallying cries. Hatchnet had been the master of lore at the Academy for more than 2 centuries, owning more prestige in Menzoberranzan than nearly any other male drow and many of the females. The matrons of the ruling families understood well the value of his practiced tongue. So it went every day, an endless stream of hate rhetoric directed against an enemy that none of the students had ever seen. The surface elves were not the only target of Hatchnet's sniping. Dwarves, gnomes, humans, halflings, and all of the surface races, and even subterranean races, such as the Duergar dwarves, which the Drow
right back, everyone.
had fought beside, each found an unpleasant spot in the master's ranting. Drizzt came to understand why no weapons were permitted in the Oval Chamber. When he left his lesson each day, he found his hands clenched by his sides in rage, unconsciously grasping for a scimitar hilt. It was obvious from the commonplace fights among the students that others felt the same way. Always, though, the overriding factor that kept some measure of control was the master's lie of the horrors of the outside world and the comforting bond of the students' common heritage. A heritage, the students would soon come to believe, that gave them enough enemies to battle beyond each other. The long, draining hours in the Oval Chamber left little time for the students to mingle. They shared common barracks, but their extensive duties outside of Hatchnet's lessons, serving the older students and masters, preparing meals, and cleaning the building, gave them barely enough time for rest. By the end of the first 10 days, they walked on the edge of exhaustion, a condition, Drizzt realized, that only increased the stirring effect of Master Hatchnet's lessons. Drizzt accepted the existence stoically, considering it far better than the 6 years he had served his mother and sisters as page prince. Still, there was one great disappointment to Drizzt in his first 10 days at Melee Macbeer. He found himself longing for his practice sessions. He sat on the edge of his bedroom late one night, holding a scimitar up before his shining eyes, remembering those many hours engaged in battle play with Zaknafin. We go to the lesson in 2 hours, Kel'Naz, in the next bunk, reminded him. Get some rest. I feel the edge leaving my hands, Drizzt replied quietly. The blade feels heavier, unbalanced. The Grand Melee is barely 10 cycles of Nargandel away, Kel'Naz said. You will get all the practice you desire there. Fear not. Whatever edge has been dulled by the days with the Master of Lore will soon be regained. In years, that fine blade of yours will rarely leave your hands. Drizzt slid the scimitar back into its scabbard and reclined on his bunk. As with so many aspects of his life so far, and he was beginning to fear, with so many aspects of his future in Enzo Baranzon, he had no choice but to accept the circumstances of his existence. "This segment of your training is at an end," Master Hatchnet announced on the morning of the 50th day. Another master, Deanon, entered the room, leading a magically suspended iron box filled with meagerly padded wooden poles of every length and design comparable to drow weapons. "Choose the sparring pole that most resembles your own weapon of choice," Hatchnet explained, as Deanon made his way around the room. He came to his brother, and Drizzt's eyes settled at once on his choice. Two slightly curving poles about 3.5 feet long. Drizzt lifted them out and put them through a simple cut. Their weight and balance closely resembled the scimitars that had become so familiar to his hands. "For the pride of Daermon and Ashespernon," Deanon whispered, then moved along. Drizzt twirled the mock weapons again. It was time to measure the value of his sessions with Zack. "Your class must have an order," Hatchnet was saying as Drizzt turned his attention beyond the scope of his new weapons. "Thus the grand melee. Remember, there can be only one victor." Hatchnet and Deanon herded the students out of the oval chamber and out of Melee Magvir altogether, down the tunnel between the two guardian spider statues at the back of Tir Bresh. For all of the students, this was the first time they had ever been out of Menzo Baranzon. "What are the rules?" Drizzt asked Kelnaz, in line at his side. "If a master calls you out, then you are out," Kelnaz replied. "The rules of engagement?" asked Drizzt. Kelnaz cast him an incredulous glance. "Win," he said simply, as though there could be no other answer. A short time later they came into a fairly large cavern, the arena for the grand melee. Pointed stalactites leered down at them from the ceiling, and stalagmite mounds broke the floor into a twisting maze filled with ambush holes and blind corners. "Choose your strategies and find your starting point," Master Hatchnet said to them. "The grand melee begins at a count of 100. The 25 students set off into action, some pausing to consider the landscape laid out before them, others sprinting off into the gloom of the maze. Drizzt decided to find a narrow corridor to ensure that he would fight off one against one, and he just started off in his search when he was grabbed from behind. "The team?" Kelnaz offered. Drizzt did not respond, unsure of the other's fighting worth and the accepted practices of this traditional encounter. "Others are forming into teams," Kelnaz pressed. "Some in threes. Together we might have a chance." "The master said there could be only one victor," Drizzt reasoned. "Who better than you, if not me?" Kelnaz replied with a sly wink. "Let us defeat the others. Then we can decide the issue between ourselves." The reasoning seemed prudent, and with Hatchnet's count already approaching 75, Drizzt had little time to ponder the possibilities. He clapped Kelnaz on the shoulder and led his new ally into the maze. Catwalks had been constructed all around the room's perimeter, even crossing through the center of the chamber, to give the judging masters a good view of all the action below. A dozen of them were up there now, all eagerly awaiting the first battles, so that they might measure the talent of this young class. 100! cried Hatchnet from his high perch. Kelnaz began to move, but Drizzt stopped him, keeping him back in the narrow corridor between two long stalagmite mounds. "Let them come to us," Drizzt signaled in the silent hand and facial expression code. He crouched in battle readiness. "Let them fight each other to weariness. Patience is our ally." Kelnaz relaxed, thinking he had made a good choice in Drizzt. Their patience was not tested severely, though, for a moment later, a tall and aggressive student burst into their defensive position, wielding a long spear-shaped pole. He came right toward Drizzt, slapping with the butt of his weapon, then spinning it over full in a brutal thrust designed for a quick kill, a strong move perfectly executed. To Drizzt, though, it seemed the most basic of attack routines. Too basic, almost, for Drizzt hardly believed that a trained student would attack another skilled fighter in such a straightforward manner. Drizzt convinced himself in time that this was indeed the chosen method of attack, and no feint, and he launched the proper parry. His scimitar pole spun counterclockwise in front of him, striking the thrusting spear in succession and driving the weapon's tip harmlessly above the striking line of its wielder's shoulder. The aggressive attacker, stunned by the found himself open and off balance. Barely a split second later, before the attacker could even begin to recover, Drizd's counter poked one, then the other scimitar pole into his chest. A soft blue light appeared on the stunned student's face, and he and Drizzt followed its line up to see a wand-wielding master looking down at them from the catwalk. "You are defeated," the master said to the tall student. "Fall where you stand." The student shot an angry glare at Drizzt and obediently dropped to the stone. "Come," Drizzt said to Kelnaz, casting a glance up at the master's revealing light. "Any others in the area will know of our position now. We must seek a new defensible area." Kelnaz paused a moment to watch the graceful hunting strides of his comrade. He had indeed made a good choice in selecting Drizzt, but he knew already, after only a single quick encounter, that if he and this skilled swordsman were the last two standing, a distinct possibility, he would have no choice at all of claiming victory. Together they rushed around a blind corner right into two opponents. Kelnaz chased after one, who fled in fright, and Drizzt faced off against the other, who wielded sword and dirk poles. A wide smile of growing confidence crossed Drizd's face as his opponent took the offensive, launching routines similarly basic to those of the spear wielder that Drizzt had easily dispatched. A few deft twists and turns of his scimitars, a few slaps on the inside edges of his opponent's weapons, had the sword and dirk flying wide. Drizd's attack came right up the middle, where he executed another double poke into his opponent's chest. The expected blue light appeared. "You are defeated," came the master's call. "Fall where you stand." Outraged, the stubborn student chopped viciously at Drizzt. Drizzt blocked with one weapon and snapped the other against his attacker's wrist, sending the sword pole flying to the floor. The attacker clenched his bruised wrist, but that was the least of his troubles. A blinding flash of lightning exploded from the observing master's wand, catching him full in the chest and hurtling him 10 feet backward to crash into a stalagmite mound. He crumpled to the floor, groaning in agony, and a line of glowing heat rose from his scorched body, which lay against the cool gray stone. "You're defeated," the master said again. Drizzt started to the fallen drow's aid, but the master issued an emphatic "No!" and Kelnaz was back at Drizd's side. "He got away," Kelnaz began, but he broke into a laugh when he saw the downed student. "If a master calls you out, then you are out," Kelnaz repeated into Drizd's blank stare. "Come," Kelnaz continued. "The battle is over. Let us find some fun." Drizzt thought his companion quite cocky for one who had yet to lift his weapons. He only shrugged and followed. Their next encounter was not so easy. They came into a double passage, turning in and out of several rock formations, and found themselves faced off against a group of three. Nobles from leading houses, both Drizzt and Kelnaz realized. Drizzt rushed the two on his left, both of whom wielded single swords, while Kelnaz worked to fend off the third. Drizzt had little experience against multiple opponents, but Zack had taught him the techniques of such a battle quite well. His movements were solely defensive at first, then he settled into a comfortable rhythm and allowed his opponents to tire themselves out and to make the critical mistakes. These were cunning foes, though, and familiar with each other's movements. Their attacks complemented each other, slicing in at Drizzt from widely opposing angles. "Two hands," Zack had once called Drizzt, and now he lived up to the title. His scimitars worked independently, yet in perfect harmony, foiling every attack. From a nearby perch on the catwalk, Masters Hatchnet and Dinan looked on, Hatchnet more than a little impressed, and Dinan swelling with pride. Drizzt saw the frustration mounting on his opponents' faces, and he knew that his opportunity to strike would soon be at hand. Then they crossed up, coming in together with identical thrusts, their sword poles barely inches apart. Drizzt spun to the side and launched a blinding uppercut slice with his left scimitar, deflecting both attacks. But he reversed his body's momentum, dropped to one knee, back in line with his opponents, and thrust in low with two snaps of his free right arm. His jabbing scimitar pole caught the first and the second squarely in the groin. They dropped their weapons in unison, clutched their bruised parts, and slumped to their knees. Drizzt leaped up before them, trying to find the words for an apology. Hatchnet nodded his approval at Denon as the two masters set their lights on the two losers. "Help me!" Kelnaz cried from beyond the dividing wall of stalagmites. Drizzt dived into a roll through a break in the wall, came up quickly, and downed a fourth opponent, who was concealed for a backstab surprise, with a backhand chop to the chest. Drizzt stopped to consider his latest victim. He hadn't even consciously known that the drow was there, but his aim had been perfect. Hatchnet blew a low whistle as he shifted his light to the most recent loser's face. "He is good," the master breathed. Drizzt saw Kelnaz a short distance away, practically forced down to his back by his opponent's skilled maneuvers. Drizzt leaped between the two and deflected an attack that surely would have finished Kelnaz. His newest opponent, wielding two sword poles, proved Drizzt's toughest challenge yet. He came at Drizzt with complicated feints and twists, forcing him on his heels more than once. "Bergignan of House Beanry," Hatchnet whispered to Denon. Denon understood the significance and hoped that his young brother was up to the test. Bergignan was not a disappointment to his distinguished kin. His moves came skilled and measured, and he and Drizzt danced about for many minutes with neither finding any advantage. The daring Bergignan then came in with the attack routine perhaps most familiar to Drizzt, the double thrust blow. Drizzt executed the crossdown to perfection, the appropriate parry as Zaknafein had so pointedly proved to him. Never satisfied, though, Drizzt then reacted on an impulse, agilely snapping a foot up between the hilts of his crossed blades and into his opponent's face. The stunned son of House Beanry fell back against the wall. "I knew the parry was wrong," Drizzt cried, already savoring the next time he would get the opportunity to foil the double thrust blow in a session against Zack. "He is good," Hatchnet gasped again to his glowing companion. Dazed, Bergignan could not fight his way out of the disadvantage. He put a globe of darkness around himself, but Drizzt waded right in, more than willing to fight blindly. Drizzt put the son of House Beanry through a quick series of attacks, ending with one of Drizzt's scimitar poles against Bergignan's exposed neck. "I am defeated," the young Beanry conceded, feeling the pole. Hearing the call, Master Hatchnet dispelled the darkness. Bergignan set both his weapons on the stone and slumped down, and the blue light appeared on his face. Drizzt couldn't hold back the widening grin. Were there any here that he could not defeat, he wondered. Drizzt then felt an explosion on the back of his head that dropped him to his knees. He managed to look back in time to see Kelnaz walking away. "A fool," Hatchnet chuckled, putting his light on Drizzt, then turning his gaze upon Denon. "A good fool." Denon crossed his arms in front of his chest, his face glowing brightly now in a flush of embarrassment and anger. Drizzt felt the cool stone against his cheek, but his only thoughts at that moment were rooted in the past, locked onto Zaknafein's sarcastic but painfully accurate statement. "It is our way." 13. The price of winning. "You deceived me," Drizzt said to Kelnaz that night in the barracks. The room was black around them, and no other students stirred in their cots, exhausted from the day's fighting and from their endless duties serving the older students. Kelnaz fully expected this encounter. He had guessed Drizzt's naivete early on, when Drizzt had actually queried him about the rules of engagement. An experienced drow warrior, particularly a noble, should have known better, should have understood that the only rule of his existence was the pursuit of victory. Now, Kelnaz knew, this foolish young Do'Urden would not strike at him for his earlier actions. Vengeance fueled by anger was not one of Drizzt's traits. "Why?" Drizzt pressed, finding no answer forthcoming from the smug commoner of House Kennefin. The volume of Drizzt's voice caused Kelnaz to glance around nervously. They were supposed to be sleeping. If a master heard them arguing. "What is the mystery?" Kelnaz signaled back in the hand code, the warmth of his fingers glowing clearly to Drizzt's heat-sensing eyes. "I acted as I had to act. Oh, I now believe I should have held off a bit longer. Perhaps if you had defeated a few more, I might have finished higher than third in the class. If we had worked together, as we had agreed, you might have won or finished second at the least," Drizzt signaled back, the sharp movements of his hands reflecting his anger. Most assuredly second, Kelnaz replied. I knew from the beginning that I would be no match for you. You are the finest swordsman I have ever seen. Not by the master's standing, Drizzt grumbled back. Eighth is not so low, Kelnaz whispered back. Bergignan is only ranked 10th, and he is from the ruling house of Menzoberranzan. You should be glad that your standing is not to be envied by your classmates. A shuffle outside the room's door sent Kelnaz back into the silent code. Holding a higher rank means only that I have more fighters eyeing my back as a convenient place to rest their daggers. Drizzt let the implication of Kelnaz's statement slip by. He refused to consider such treachery in the academy. Bergignan was the finest fighter I saw in the Grand Melee, he signaled. He had you beaten until I interceded on your behalf. Kelnaz smiled the thought away. Let Bergignan serve as a cook in some lowly house for all I care, he whispered even more quietly than before, for the son of House Behenry's bunk was only a few yards away. He is 10th, yet I, Kelnaz of Kennefin, am 3rd. I am 8th, said Drizzt, an uncharacteristic edge on his voice, more anger than jealousy. But I could defeat you with any weapon. Kelnaz shrugged, a strangely blurring movement to onlookers seeing in the infrared spectrum. You did not, he signaled. I won our encounter. Encounter? Drizzt gasped. You deceived me, that is all. Who was left standing? Kelnaz pointedly reminded him. Who wore the blue light of a master's wand? Honor demands that there be rules of engagement, growled Drizzt. There is a rule, Kelnaz snapped back at him. You may do whatever you can get away with. I won our encounter, Drizzt Do'Urden, and I hold the higher rank. That is all that matters. In the heat of the argument, their voices had grown too loud. The door to the room swung wide, and a master stepped onto the threshold, his form vividly outlined by the hallway's blue lights. Both students promptly rolled over and closed their eyes and their mouths. The finality of Kelnaz's last statement rocked Drizzt to some prudent observations. He realized then that his friendship with Kelnaz had come to an end, and perhaps that he and Kelnaz had never been friends at all. You have seen him? Alden asked, his fingers tapping anxiously on the small table in the highest chamber of his private quarters. Alden had sent the younger students of Sorcere to work repairing the blasted place, but the scorch marks on the stone walls remained, a legacy of Alden's fireball. I have, replied Massage. I have heard of his skill with weapons. 8th in his class after the Grand Melee, said Alden. A fine achievement. By all accounts, he has the prowess to be first, said Massage. One day he will claim that title. I shall be careful about that one. He will never live to claim it, Alden promised. House Do'Urden puts great pride in his purple-eyed youth, and thus I have decided upon Drizzt as my first target for revenge. His death will bring pain to that treacherous matron Malice. Massage saw a problem here, and decided to put it to rest once and for all. You will not harm him, he warned Alden. You will not even go near him. Alden's tone became no less grim. I have waited 2 decades, he began. You can wait a few more, Massage snapped back. I remind you that you accepted Matron Sinefe's invitation into House Hannet. Such an alliance requires obedience. Matron Sinefe, our matron mother, has placed upon my shoulders the task of handling Drizzt Do'Urden, and I will execute her will. Alden rested back in his seat across the table, and put what was left of his acid-torn chin into a slender palm, carefully weighing the words of his secret partner. Matron Sinefe has plans that will bring you all the revenge you could possibly desire, Massage continued. I warn you now, Alden de Vere, he snarled, emphasizing the surname that was not Hannet, that if you begin a war with House Do'Urden, or even put them on the defensive with any act of violence unsanctioned by Matron Sinefe, you will incur the wrath of House Hannet. Matron Sinefe will expose you as a murderous impostor, and will exact every punishment allowable by the ruling council upon your pitiful bones. Alden had no way to refute the threat. He was a rogue, without family beyond the adopted Hannets. If Sinefe turned against him, he would find no allies. What plan does Sinefe, Matron Sinefe, have for House Do'Urden? He asked calmly. Tell me of my revenge, so that I may survive these torturous years of waiting. Massage knew that he had to act carefully at this point. His mother had not forbidden him to tell Alton of a future course of action, but if she had wanted the volatile DeVere to know, Massage realized, she would have told him herself. Let us just say that House de Werden's power has grown, and continues to grow, to the point where it has become a very real threat to all the great houses. Massage purred, loving the intrigue of positioning before a war. Witness the fall of House de Vere, perfectly executed with no obvious trail. Many of Menzo Berenzon's nobles would rest easier if, let it go at that, deciding that he probably had said too much already. By the hot glimmer in Alton's eyes, Massage could tell that the lure had been strong enough to buy Alton's patience. The Academy held many disappointments for young Drizzt, particularly in that first year, when so many of the dark realities of Drow society, realities that Zaknafein had barely hinted at, remained on the edges of Drizzt's cognizance with stubborn resilience. He weighed the Master's lectures of hatred and mistrust in both hands, one side holding the Master's views in the context of the lectures, the other bending those same words into the very different logic assumed by his old mentor. The truth seemed so ambiguous, so hard to define. Through all of the examination, Drizzt found that he could not escape one pervading fact.
Be right back,
In his
everyone.
entire young life, the only treachery he had ever witnessed, and so often, was at the hands of Drow elves. The physical training of the Academy, hours on end of dueling exercises and stealth techniques, was more to Drizzt's liking. Here, with his weapons so readily in his hands, he freed himself of the disturbing questions of truth and perceived truth. Here he excelled. If Drizzt had come into the Academy with a higher level of training and expertise than that of his classmates, the gap grew only wider as the grueling months passed. He learned to look beyond the accepted defense and attack routines put forth by the Masters and create his own methods, innovations that almost always at least equaled and usually outdid the standard techniques. At first, Dinan listened with increasing pride as his peers exulted in his younger brother's fighting prowess. So glowing came the compliments that the eldest son of Matron Malice soon took on a nervous wariness. Dinan was the elder boy of House de Werden, a title he had gained by eliminating Nalfane. Drizzt, showing the potential to become one of the finest swordsmen in all of Menzo Berenzon, was now the second boy of the house, eyeing perhaps Dinan's title. Similarly, Drizzt's fellow students did not miss the growing brilliance of his fighting dance. Often they viewed it too close for their liking. They looked upon Drizzt with seething jealousy, wondering if they could ever measure up against his whirling scimitars. Pragmatism was ever a strong trait in Drow elves. These young students had spent the bulk of their years observing the elders of their families, twisting every situation into a favorable light. Every one of them recognized the value of Drizzt as an ally, and thus, when the grand melee came around the next year, Drizzt was inundated with offers of partnership. The most surprising query came from Kelnaz of House Kenefin, who had downed Drizzt through deceit the previous year. "Do we join again? This time to the very top of the class?" a haughty young fighter asked as he moved beside Drizzt down the tunnel to the prepared cavern. He moved around and stood before Drizzt easily, as if they were the best of friends, his forearms resting across the hilts of his belted weapons, and an overly friendly smile spread across his face. Drizzt could not even answer. He turned and walked away, pointedly keeping his eye over one shoulder as he left. "Why are you so amazed?" Kelnaz pressed, stepping quickly to keep up. Drizzt spun on him. "How could I join again with one who so deceived me?" he snarled. "I have not forgotten your trick." "That is the point," Kelnaz argued. "You are more wary this year. Certainly I would be a fool to attempt such a move again." "How else could you win?" said Drizzt. "You cannot defeat me in open battle." His words were not a boast, just a fact that Kelnaz accepted as readily as Drizzt. "Second rank is highly honored," Kelnaz reasoned. Drizzt glared at him. He knew that Kelnaz would not settle for anything less than ultimate victory. "If we meet in the melee," he said with cold finality, "it will be as opponents." He walked off again, and this time Kelnaz did not follow. Luck bestowed a measure of justice upon Drizzt that day, for his first opponent and first victim in the grand melee was none other than his former partner. Drizzt found Kel'Naz in the same corridor they had used as a defensible starting point the previous year, and took him down with his very first attack combination. Drizzt somehow managed to hold back on his winning thrust, though he truly wanted to jab his scimitar pole into Kel'Naz's ribs with all his strength. Then Drizzt was off into the shadows, picking his way carefully until the numbers of surviving students began to dwindle. With his reputation, Drizzt had to be extra wary, for his classmates recognized a common advantage in eliminating one of his prowess early in the competition. Working alone, Drizzt had to fully scope out every battle before he engaged to ensure that each opponent had no secret companions lurking nearby. This was Drizzt's arena, the place where he felt most comfortable, and he was up to the challenge. In 2 hours, only 5 competitors remained, and after another 2 hours of cat and mouse, it came down to only 2, Drizzt and Bergignan Behenry. Drizzt moved out into an open stretch of the cavern. "Come out then, student Behenry," he called. "Let us settle this challenge openly and with honor." Walking from the catwalk, Dinan shook his head in disbelief. "He has relinquished all advantage," said Master Hatchnet, standing beside the elder boy of House Do'Urden. "As the better swordsman, he had Bergignan worried and unsure of his moves. Now your brother stands out in the open, showing his position." "Still a fool," Dinan muttered. Hatchnet spotted Bergignan slipping behind a stalagmite mound a few yards behind Drizzt. "It should be settled soon." "Are you afraid?" Drizzt yelled into the gloom. "If you truly deserve the top rank, as you freely boast, then come out and face me openly. Prove your words, Bergignan Behenry, or never speak them again." The expected rush of motion from behind sent Drizzt into a sidelong roll. "Fighting is more than swordplay," the son of House Behenry cried as he came on, his eyes gleaming at the advantage he now seemed to hold. Bergignan stumbled then, tripped up by a wire Drizzt had set out, and fell flat to his face. Drizzt was on him in a flash, scimitar pole tip in at Bergignan's throat. "So I have learned," Drizzt replied grimly. "Thus a Do'Urden becomes the champion," Hatchnet observed, putting his blue light on the face of House Behenry's defeated son. Hatchnet then stole Dinan's widening smile with a prudent reminder. "Elder boys should beware second boys with such skills." While Drizzt took little pride in his victory that second year, he took great satisfaction in the continued growth of his fighting skills. He practiced every waking hour when he was not busy in the many serving duties of a young student. Those duties were reduced as the years passed. The youngest students were worked the hardest, and Drizzt found more and more time in private training. He reveled in the dance of his blades and the harmony of his movements. His scimitars became his only friends, the only things he dared to trust. He won the grand melee again the 3rd year, and the year after that, despite the conspiracies of many others against him. To the masters, it became obvious that none in Drizzt's class would ever defeat him, and the next year they placed him into the grand melee of students 3 years his senior. He won that one too. The academy, above anything else in Menzoberranzan, was a structured place, and though Drizzt's advanced skill defied that structure in terms of battle prowess, his tenure as a student would not be lessened. As a fighter, he would spend 10 years in the academy, not such a long time considering the 30 years of study a wizard endured in Sorcere, or the 50 years a budding priestess would spend in Eric Tinolith. While fighters began their training at the young age of 20, wizards could not start until their 25th birthday, and clerics had to wait until the age of 40. The first 4 years in Melee Macvir were devoted to singular combat, the handling of weapons. In this, the masters could teach Drizzt little that Zaknafein had not already shown him. After that, though, the lessons became more involved. The young Drow warriors spent 2 full years learning group fighting tactics with other warriors, and the subsequent 3 years incorporated those tactics into warfare techniques beside and against wizards and clerics. The final year at the academy rounded out the fighter's education. The first 6 months were spent in Sorcerer, learning the basics of magic use, and the last 6, the prelude to graduation, saw the fighters in tutelage under the priestesses of Eric Tinolith. All the while there remained the rhetoric, the hammering in of those precepts that the Spider Queen held so dear, those lies of hatred that held the Drow in a state of controllable chaos. To Drizzt, the Academy became a personal challenge, a private classroom within the impenetrable womb of his whirling scimitars. Inside the adamantine walls he formed with those blades, Drizzt found he could ignore the many injustices he observed all around him, and could somewhat insulate himself against words that would have poisoned his heart. The Academy was a place of constant ambition and deceit, a breeding ground for the ravenous, consuming hunger for power that marked the life of all the Drow. Drizzt would survive it unscathed, he promised himself. As the years passed, though, as the battles began to take on the edge of brutal reality, Drizzt found himself caught up time and again in the heated throes of situations he could not so easily brush away. 14. Proper respect. They moved through the winding tunnels as quietly as a whispering breeze, each step measured in stealth and ending in an alert posture. They were ninth-year students working on their last year in Melee Macthir, and they operated as often outside the cavern of Menzo Baronzon as within. No longer did padded poles adorn their belts. Adamantine weapons hung there now, finely forged and cruelly edged. At times, the tunnels closed in around them, barely wide enough for one dark elf to squeeze through. Other times, the students found themselves in huge caverns with walls and ceilings beyond their sight. They were Drow warriors, trained to operate in any type of underdark landscape, and learned in the ways of any foe they might encounter. Practice patrols, Master Hatchnet had called these raids, though he warned the students that practice patrols often met monsters quite real and unfriendly. Drizzt, still rated in the top of his class and in the point position, led this group, with Master Hatchnet and 10 other students following in formation behind. Only 22 of the original 25 in Drizzt's class remained. One had been dismissed and subsequently executed for a foiled assassination attempt on a high-ranking student. A second had been killed in the practice arena, and a third had died in his bunk of natural causes, for a dagger in the heart quite naturally ends one's life. In another tunnel a short distance away, Bergignon Baenri, holding the class's second rank, led Master Demon and the other half of the class in a similar exercise. Day after day, Drizzt and the others had struggled to keep the fine edge of readiness. In 3 months of these mock patrols, the group had encountered only one monster, a cave fisher, a nasty crab-like denizen of the Underdark. Even that conflict had provided only brief excitement and no practical experience, for the cave fisher had slipped out along the high ledges before the Drow patrol could even get a strike at it. This day, Drizzt sensed something different. Perhaps it was an unusual edge on Master Hatchnet's voice, or a tingling in the stones of the cavern, a subtle vibration that hinted to Drizzt's subconscious of other creatures in the maze of tunnels. Whatever the reason, Drizzt knew enough to follow his instincts, and he was not surprised when the telltale glow of a heat source flitted down a side passage on the periphery of his vision. He signaled for the rest of the patrol to halt, then quickly climbed to a
Alright, I'm gonna call into the stream for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone keep stopping by. Appreciate all y'all support. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe.